the Amidon Planet Podcast, episode 36. I'm your host, Joel Amidon. Thank you for joining me on this never-ending quest to figure out how to teach better. Today on the podcast is Dr. Rick Balkin, Professor of Leadership and Counselor Education in the School of Education here at the University of Mississippi. He's joining me to talk about his new book, Practicing Forgiveness, A Path Toward Healing, which is being released on December 1st, 2020. So about a month from now, from when this podcast is going to be released. And so I don't even have to go into the disclaimer because I'm going to be talking about a book with its author, and you can only pre-order this thing. So, and guess where you can pre-order it? At your local bookstore of Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi. So I will post a link in the show notes so you can get access to Rick's book. You're going to hear a lot of stories and anecdotes and things that's where he's talking about forgiveness, and also just the life experiences that Rick had that go into this book. How much stuff of Rick's is packed into this little book is pretty amazing. So I'm going to highly recommend this book. I enjoyed reading it in preparation for this podcast, and I know you'll enjoy it too. If you have any sort of need to think about forgiveness, and I think we all do, I would highly recommend picking up this book. But I don't want to delay anymore. This is a great conversation. It's a pretty long conversation, but it's a good one. So here, without further delay, is my conversation with Dr. Rick Balkin. Dr. Rick Balkin, fantastic to have you finally on the Amidon Planet Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Hey, so some people might not know the man, the myth, the legend of Dr. Rick Balkin. So Rick, could you just do a quick little intro of yourself?
Sure. So I was going to be an English teacher. I got my bachelor's degree in secondary education language arts.
Really? Oh,
and,
okay.
Yeah. And I did my student teaching, and it was good, but it wasn't great. It was good. I could sense that there was going to be a burnout to it. And so I thought I would stick around for my master's degree, and I was thinking I was going to get my master's degree in English. And then I woke up one night and went, what would I do with a master's degree in English?
Yeah.
And, what really drove me into teaching was, in particular, secondary education, was just being able to impact adolescents. That was just I had a real interest in doing that. And so that led me into the area of school counseling. And I thought, maybe school counseling would be a good way. And I would teach for a few years, and I would go into school counseling but why not just get the degree now? And so I went straight through bachelor's to master's, got my master's degree in school counseling, and I was a December graduate. I graduated in December. December 1992. But there was a position open in a guidance department at the alternative school where I was in Columbia, Missouri. And so I took a position there, and it was working on a grant called Serve America, where we had these students in the alternative school doing volunteer opportunities, and I helped coordinate that. And did that for about 5 months. And in the meantime, I'm, during the winter break, I was at home, and a family friend who worked at a psychiatric hospital on an adolescent unit says, we're going to have an opening. And I'm like, what I really enjoy the most is working with teens. Yeah. And so that got me into the psychiatric hospital system. And so in May of 93, I joined a program called Recover Team in Little Rock, Arkansas, and became a counselor, therapist on an adolescent unit. And I did both an outpatient program, kind of a post-care program, and then I did inpatient work. And within that 7 years, I also did geriatrics, adult chemical dependency, and adult psych. And kind of just reached the point where I was like, what do I do now after 7 years? I really enjoyed my job, but I thought maybe being a program director would be good. And I thought maybe having a PhD would open up some areas for me. So I went and I got my doctorate in counselor education. And when I started my doctoral program, it was to become a program director. And when I ended it, I I have people saying, Rick, you need to look at academe, and you're a good researcher. And academe's a peach job. And I ended up taking a position at Texas A&M University Commerce as an assistant professor in the counseling program, and was there for 6 years, and then to Corpus Christi for 5 years, and then to Louisville, Kentucky for 3 years, and now the University of Mississippi. And I love it here. I love it here.
Climb the mountain all the way.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, that's I mean, I think I say this every episode. It's like, this is the podcast is an excuse to have these conversations. Like, I didn't know that you were going to train to be a high school English teacher. So that brings me to a question. Like, what's your favorite book from like the canon or whatever? Like, what was the thing that you're like, I can't wait to teach that book? So,
my favorite area, and if I were, and I contemplated getting a master's and doctorate in English, and had I done that, I would have gone into medieval literature.
Right. All right. Okay.
Yeah. I would have gone into Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, The Pearl. It's a long poem. Beowulf, the Canterbury Tales. I loved that stuff. And so I would have gone in that direction. But when teaching, particularly teaching high school English, you don't spend a lot of time on medieval literature. You might cover Beowulf, in the Canterbury Tales, when you do like English literature, but Dickens.
Really?
I had, Hard Times. I loved that novel. And I had the most amazing professor when I was learning about Dickens. And she said something to me, her name was Marie Laga. Oh, she was a gem. And she said to me, the only regret I have about Dickens is I can't read him for the first time again.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And so, that's what, that stuck with me. And so when I did my student teaching, I taught Hard Times.
Nice.
And the students struggled with it, but it was still fun.
Yeah. And I mean, in looking back, my only knowledge of Dickens is, I've read a few of his things, but like, it was that he wrote in those small chapters because it was like released in the papers, right? Was it released like little chunks at a time, which is interesting. Like then you kind of, when you know that, it's like, oh, okay, that's why these things are happening in these sorts of chunks. Yeah. My high school English experience that led me into literature, like I had Mr. Powers was, and he got me to love literature. I mean, I was a reader, but like to like really dive into some of these areas. And like, he had us, gave us choices in what we could read. And then we would would bring in coffee and say like, this is what you do. You read these great works and then you talk about them and you drink coffee. And it's like fantastic. And he introduced me to my favorite book of all time, The Sun Also Rises by Hemingway. And I just love the description of the fishing and the bullfighting and just this, these relationships that are going on in this straight, I read that probably once a year. I don't know what that says about me. I know you're a counselor. You're probably like, ooh, Joel might have some issues.
Yeah. The important thing is that you read,
That's right.
I really like short stories, though I don't read many of them. But one of my favorite classes was a class on modern short stories, which introduced me to Isaac Bashevis Singer, who's a Jewish author and wrote a short story called Gimple the Fool, which is really an allegory to Job. And that's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Awesome. Here we go. We're going to have some, maybe we should have some reader recommendations coming from Dr. Rick every week. Maybe. There you go. Yeah. But speaking of books, segue, this book, I'm excited to hear. I knew you were working on a book. I can't remember. Maybe it was even a year before you were talking about like this book coming out. We do jujitsu together. So we'd have all, some talk before and after class, and we'd talk about things that are happening. And so you talked about this book a while ago, this Practicing Forgiveness, A Path Toward Healing. So just give us a little, where did this book come from?
Came from my experience working with adolescents in the psychiatric hospital. So it's all connected. And I tell the story at the beginning of the book with a story about Sheila.
Yeah.
Sheila inspired the book. Sheila is a pseudonym, but Sheila was 16 years old, and she tells her school counselor that she's being sexually abused by her father. And her school counselor does all the things that you're supposed to do, calls the abuse hotline, makes a report. There's an investigation. I testify in court during all this. It's intense. That's one of the reasons why the case just stood with me, is because I went to court, and it was a very intense court appearance that I talk about in the book, with the father denying the allegations and the daughter, standing firm, and being asked why I believe the daughter, and I got to justify why I believe the daughter's story. But in the midst of all this, if you can imagine, father's denying the allegations. He's been removed from the home. He's been arrested. Mom is just hysterical, and feels very torn between what's going on, and the family's fallen apart. And I'm doing the very first family session at the hospital with the mom and the daughter. And to kind of set this up, we have a family conference room. I first meet with the mom, and I talk to the mom, and I'm like, what your daughter really needs right now is support. And what got the daughter into the hospital is that with all this going on, she threatened suicide. And so she comes in and is admitted to the hospital under child protective custody. So she's in she's in custody. And so her caseworker is the one who signed the papers, not the mom. All right. So, and mom seems to understand what I'm saying, and I bring the daughter in, and we come into this family conference room, and there's a sofa and a chair, two chairs, my chair and another chair, and I expect the parent and the kid to sit on the sofa together, and they don't. The daughter comes in, she goes to the sofa, mom sits in the chair next to me, and the first thing the mom says to the daughter is, as a Christian, you have to forgive him. And I look at the mom without missing a beat. I mean, I don't pause or anything. I don't let that resonate. I just look straight at the mom and I go, wouldn't that be convenient for you? And mom is looking at me like shocked and seething, like, what did you just say? And I'm like, yeah, then you don't have to choose between your daughter's disclosure and your husband's denial. You can just sweep it all under the rug because it's forgiven. And so, as you can imagine, that family session doesn't go so hot. And I'm not going to tell you that was the best thing to say. It's what I said, though.
Right.
And I've had people say, I don't like what you said to the mom. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not changing the narrative because you don't like it. Right. That's what I said. And, on the positive side, my client knew, the daughter knew, Sheila knew, I got you. I'm with you. Mm-hmm. And so, lots of stuff happens. Sheila's placed out of the home after she's discharged. Dad goes to jail. And this case sits with me. Time passes, I go get my doctorate. It's about 5 years. And I've settled in McKinney, Texas. And I've joined a synagogue. And it's Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement. Mm-hmm. And I go to Yom Kippur services, and then there's a study group afterwards. It's like, I'm going to go to the study group because I don't want to go home and stare at the fridge because I'm fasting. So I go to the study group, and there's this leader in the group. He's not a rabbi, but he's a leader, in the congregation who's gone through Jewish education training.
Mm-hmm.
And he's presenting this talk on the Jewish conceptualization of forgiveness. And he gives 3 types of forgiveness. He talks about teshuvah, which is spiritual forgiveness, the forgiveness only God can give. And then he talks about selicha, which is like restitutional forgiveness. I borrow your lawnmower, I break your lawnmower, but I repair your lawnmower, so we're good.
Mm-hmm.
And then he talks about this concept of mechila, which translates to wipe away debt, which I thought was kind of funny because, Jews are always stereotyped about, finances. And I'm like, oh, to wipe away debt, where was that in Fiddler on the Roof? You don't owe me anything anymore. We're good. The butcher doesn't say that, so this idea of mechila was interesting to me. This idea that you wipe away debt. And when do you do that? You do that when the person who has caused harm, who's made an infraction, who owes you something, can't repay the debt. And you decide, what I want from you, I'm never going to get. And so we're done. We're good. You don't owe me anything anymore. Now, there's no mandate there to reconcile the relationship, to heal the relationship. You just simply acknowledge that what you want, you're never going to get. And I'm like, oh my God, abuse, neglect, these are things that once done, you can't undo. If after this podcast, you get on Facebook and go, wow, worst podcast ever, and you type my name down and it gets 30,000 hits and it's going viral and you go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I want people to listen to this podcast, and you erase it, but it's already out there.
Right.
And you're like, Rick, I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do about that. It's been done. But, there is this idea of, what I want, I'm never going to get. And I'm not going to live my life focusing on any ill will anymore. And so one type of forgiveness is this interpersonal forgiveness that we think about. It's what Sheila's mom was talking about. As a Christian, you have to forgive him, and then you have to reconcile this relationship. But another type of forgiveness is this intrapersonal forgiveness, this concept of mechila, where you say, I'm going to go it alone, and I'm going to release feelings of ill will, and I'm not going to brood on this anymore. But I'm also going to protect myself. I'm going to stay safe. I'm not going to put myself into a negative relationship with this person. I don't have to reconcile with this person. I can simply go on, without this negative burden. And that resonated to me. And I'm like, this isn't talked about. It's not talked about in counseling. It's not talked about in the literature. As a matter of fact, when I started to go into the literature, I was seeing this debate about whether reconciliation was part of forgiveness or not. I called it the reconciliation dilemma.
Yeah.
And I took this model, this conceptual model, and said, we can apply this Jewish conceptualization into clinical practice of forgiveness. And I create this model, which I end up calling the forgiveness reconciliation model, but I didn't know at the time that's what I was going to call it. And it gets published in a journal called Counseling and Values. And I go to a presentation at the national conference, and I'm doing this presentation. And, I've been presenting on adolescents who are at risk and in crisis, and I'd have like 6 people attend. I do this presentation on a concept. There's no numbers to back up. It's just a concept that I gleaned from the literature and kind of synthesized. 120 people are in the room.
Oof.
I mean, it's packed.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow, this has impact. And then the Ecumenical Center in San Antonio is like, hey, come do a workshop with us. I'm like, I've written one article and I'm being asked to do a 6-hour workshop. How does that work? Mm-hmm. And, but people were interested in this. And which gave me the question, well, how do I validate this model? And I created a measure called the Forgiveness Reconciliation Inventory based on this model. And it turns out into this kind of really cool thing where I have this model and this measure and people are digging it. And I'm like, how do I get this information out to the mainstream? I don't just want to talk to counselors. I want to talk to everybody. And that's where the birth of the book came from. So wow. That yeah, it's kind of a long story, but
that's yeah. I mean, one, the story that you shared about Sheila, I mean, and I would assume that you have lots of stories like that given the work that you did and you share a lot of them within the book, where like this sort of model is necessary in order to have some sort of way to work through these issues. But like just hearing also how the evolution of something like that, I mean, it's not like you decided to write a book and 6 months later it's out. I mean, this is like, it's kind of a life's work sort of that's come about, like, and not just to say, hey, here's an idea, but then also let's see if there's any validation to it. Let's make the inventory. And I mean, I just love the thoughtfulness that's going on here. And so, and the little package it now comes in, and you think like all the story that's within it, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah. It's been a journey, and yeah, it's not, it wasn't, I've got this idea. It's something that I experienced. And, you think about the synchronous moments that have to happen for this to transpire, being home during winter break, getting the job offer that moves me to the hospital, working with this client, getting the job at A&M Commerce, which puts me in McKinney, Texas in 2003 at the synagogue on Yom Kippur. It's
knowing you're going to be hungry when you go home, so you better go to the study group. So
go to the study group, right? If I don't go to that study group, this doesn't happen.
Right. Oh, absolutely. It's kind of amazing. It's pretty amazing. And also too, I'm just want to acknowledge for our audience that Rick is also an expert in quantitative measures. So it's cool to see those sorts of things come about, that you're able to use those gifts in these sorts of things too. And one thing that really attracted me to this book too, Rick, in reading it, and I was texting you like, oh, I'm loving reading this, but also too, just this idea of, we're not just, when we're doing something in academia or we're doing something for this, we're not just like these professors that live in an office and doing this work and really, and we're separate from our lives outside. I mean, like, so you're incorporating some things that you learned about going to the synagogue and bringing in these ideas and thinking like, well, these have use within the field that I'm interested in. And then, because some of the same thing for me, I was wondering about my own journey and my thinking about how I want to teach, and like looking to my own faith life and bringing in some of those ideas and like, what does this mean? And with regards to teaching mathematics, what does agape have to do with that? And so like these sorts of things that come together, it shows like this work is a part of who we are. It's not just, something we do.
Right. No, it's, yeah, I think one of the strengths of this model is that it comes from a Jewish conceptualization, but it's a universal idea, and that's that, and there's a little bit of pride where I can take this really relatively unknown concept in Judaism and maybe bring it to the mainstream, bring it to the world, and in doing that, I'm not just sharing my ideas about forgiveness and sharing the research about forgiveness, but maybe also sharing a little bit about me and my culture and my my feelings about this.
Well, and also too, your voice is in the book too. I just love, seeing like you're asking yourself, and maybe you're thinking this, well, like you just, man, this is Rick. If there's any doubt that Rick wrote this, it's like these exchanges in here, or even just the story you held with, that you talked about with Sheila and the way that you stood up for her, and you say, well, wouldn't that be convenient? And I mean, just like that representation of, hey, I need to say something here. I need to do what's right. And I need to show my client that I'm in their corner. And here we go. It might not be the best thing to do, but this is, I'm not going to apologize. Like I need to do this. I need to say this thing. And so.
Yeah. It was, I've struggled with that, this family fell apart, and, what would have happened had I said something like to the mom, it must be really difficult for you to hear your daughter's disclosure and your husband's denial, but I didn't say that, I didn't go there at all, I went for the jugular.
That's right.
So, but I wonder about those things,
right.
Again, it gets into these, these synchronous moments of what you say and where it takes you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you've said later, it's what I said. And so, you could reanalyze it and do all sorts of things. And I think that kind of lines up with where we want to go, is like thinking about what are the learnings we can gather from this book. And it's kind of interesting. I always, using these categories, we're talking about somebody else's book. So, that's usually the practice, but then every now and then get an opportunity to talk to the actual author of a book. And so I'm curious, like thinking back in some of the learnings that you might have in like reflecting, you're reading through the galleys and you think like, wow, here's some things that I learned from doing, engaging this project. And so maybe I'll just toss it to you. What's something that we can take away? What's the learning that you had from this book?
Well, one thought is that, we often like to label ourselves, and we do this all the time. We get on Facebook, what Star Trek character am I? If I were a potato, what kind of potato would I be? Would I be a sweet potato? Would I be a French fry? Would I be a loaded baked potato?
Yukon Gold. All right, here we go.
Right. So, we see these surveys all the time. We love to label ourselves, label other people. But we have to be very careful here, because forgiveness is so context bound, and one of the examples I give is, you could have maybe a son or daughter who brings home a friend, and the friend steals $20 out of your wallet, and you tell your son or daughter, this friend is never allowed in our house again. But what if the person who stole $20 out of your wallet was your nephew or niece? Well, now we have to have a talk, and so the same event might elicit a different reaction because of the context, and so you're not a forgiving person or an unforgiving person. You're just a person making decisions about forgiveness based on the context. I've worked with couples, and I've worked with infidelity, and, dealing with infidelity for a couple who's been together for 6 months is a lot different than dealing with infidelity, for a couple who's been together for, 10, 15, 20 years. The issues are very different, and so, so you can't just take something as simple as, an offense and go, well, I would forgive that, I wouldn't. You don't necessarily know. And these are harder issues. Another learning thing was, learning concept, this was good. I would never consider myself Jungian, but I find myself always liking Carl Jung. For certain reasons. He talks about synchronicity, but he also talks about archetypes, these myths, these legends, these stories that come again and again and again throughout our history. And we tell them in fiction, we live them.
Give an example of one, Rick, just to make sure people understand what you're talking about, like archetypes.
So, we might consider something like redemption as an archetype. All right. What are stories of redemption? King David is a story of redemption. All right. He sins and he is forgiven. I
was going to go Norman Dale from Hoosiers, who hit the kid, hit the college, then came and won the title for the Huskers. Redemption. There you go.
Right. Tiger Woods.
Yeah, use that example. Yeah.
Yeah, lots of people cheer Tiger Woods when he wins. What about Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker?
Yeah.
The dude blew up a planet. Okay,
yeah.
He is not a good guy.
Yeah.
All right, but in the end, he saves Luke. He kills the Emperor the first time, and we think he does, and and he becomes a Force ghost, and hey, that's what you want, right? But we also have the opposite. We have Voldemort. Harry doesn't reconcile with Voldemort. Voldemort is an evil dude to the end.
Right.
And these archetypes serve as pathways to interpersonal forgiveness and reconciliation versus interpersonal forgiveness and mechila, when what Harry wants for his parents to be alive, he's never going to get.
Right.
And Voldemort's never apologetic. He never turns. Evil to the core to the end, and we're left with a lot of loss. So, I think our stories are very, very educational, about forgiveness. And they feed into our beliefs and our culture about forgiveness. And you think about, when do we learn about forgiveness? We learn about forgiveness when we're a child and we do something wrong.
Right.
We hit mommy. Mommy told us to put something down. We wouldn't put it down. She took it away and we smacked mommy, and we are told you do not smack mommy. All right. And now we're crying, and what are we told? You need to apologize to mommy. And so we're crying, I'm sorry. And it's like, it's okay. And then you get a hug, and you've been reinforced for this behavior that you really can't conceptualize or understand about apologies and forgiveness. And how does that culture and that learning impact us in our adulthood? There are, and you may know people who, they've experienced some really tough times in their relationships, but they're not leaving those relationships. And sometimes that's based on a lack of insight. Sometimes that's based on a false belief that the person's going to change. But sometimes that's based on culture, that you don't leave, that you stick around, that you see it through. And so, there are cultural and religious aspects about forgiveness, to turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
The Dylan Roof hearing. Dylan Roof was the shooter in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yep.
And you can go on YouTube and you can watch the court hearing.
Yep.
Where the family members are confronting Dylan Roof. And they're saying things like, I forgive you because I have to forgive you. And may God have mercy on your soul. And so it's not necessarily an emotional forgiveness, but it's a decisional forgiveness.
I think, as you point out in the book, that was like 2 days later, right? It was like, it's very brief amount of time.
Yeah. And so, we see this, we see culture play an important role in forgiveness. So I think that those are, and because of that, one of the things that we might have to teach ourselves, or at least challenge ourselves, is to explore, what do we believe about forgiveness? And how are those beliefs helping me or hindering me in my path forward? And if I am being hindered by those beliefs, are there some alternative beliefs that I may need to consider? And that's kind of what this model is about.
Yeah, it got me thinking about some things that happened in my own life, and won't turn this into a counseling session because I don't know what you charge. But I mean, just thinking about some of the, the key things that come up is like, thinking about what Sheila's mom, like what her, even to think like what her thoughts are on forgiveness. I mean, maybe she just grew up in a, I'm sorry, you need to forgive, like, and, maybe even like the sophisticated version, rather than saying, I'm sorry, say, I apologize. And that's what he's going to have to do. And then that'll clear this up. Cause that's my understanding of forgiveness. And it's just, I guess that was my learning of one thing is just one, don't force forgiveness, right? Like that's, and thinking about what do I do with my kids or even in classrooms or, where things happen. So we have, people interacting. And so there's going to be wrongs that are going to happen. But to force that forgiveness where, I've seen it so often with my kid. I got 3 kids, like, hey, you did something wrong. And probably before I even thought even about the apology thing, it was like, say, you're sorry. I'm sorry. As they're smiling, running away. And like, yes, I got a victory. I'm like, but that that didn't have anything to do with that was, they said a word and they didn't actually know the word, the meaning behind it. And so right. to treat these things a little bit more, treat them better. I mean, I just treat them, there's something there that if we don't deal with it, then that can lead to some things.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you've read the book. So Jordan Peterson has a book, The 10 Rules for Life. And he was talking about some incidents where, like, if one of them is like, don't let your kids do things that, embarrass you in public and not deal with them, because you're going to like hold a debt against them later. Like you need to basically say like, hey, to structure that. And it kind of spoke into this model of like, if you don't, there's a debt. There's going to be a debt. Like you embarrass me. And so then, you embarrass me in public. And then he'll say like, well, then when they bring up a picture that they drew, that's of a scarecrow or something, like, you're not going to want to say, oh, that's pretty good. You're just, because there's a debt there. And you're like, nah, it's okay. And so like, again, dealing with these things, it seems like you're offering us a structured way in order to think about how do we deal with, I guess, these offenses. I don't know. Is that the best way to put it?
Right. Well, and it, a lot of it depends on, the person who commits the offense. Are they able to grow and change? Do they express remorse? Versus someone who is unable or unwilling to grow and change.
Right.
Or for more severe situations of, I don't care if this person grows and changes or not. I'm done. No, and hell no. So that's I think we have to consider when we're trying to decide whether we want to reconcile or not. And what I refer to, I consider reconciliation, not necessarily as things go back to as they were. I refer to it as a renegotiation of the relationship.
Right.
Okay. I thought you were this, but you're not. So what are you?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I need to permit you to be who you are, but I still want to be involved with you, and let's figure this out. And so you have to renegotiate the relationship sometimes.
Yeah, and there was the story that you shared of the couple, and they both had some infidelity, and like, you can't think like, yeah, they can't just jump back into the relationship to be as it was before. It can't, right? They needed to, and it sounds like in the story, they stayed together. So like they had to renegotiate the relationship. What does this relationship look like going forward?
Yeah.
So I guess that gets to the model, right? And that was one thing another thing I learned was like, forgiveness is complex. Right? It's more than just, I'm sorry and run away. It's complex, but it can be structured, and you offer a structure through your forgiveness reconciliation model. So maybe just, I know it's a life's work, so I'm asking you to do something pretty important, but, briefly walk through like the 4 phases that you discuss of the model.
Yeah. And the first phase I refer to as collaborative exploration. And it's this idea of exploring your ideas about forgiveness and about the person who harmed you. How do you feel towards this person? How do you feel about what happened, about what transpired? But notice I don't call it exploration. I call it collaborative exploration. Mm-hmm. I encourage people to engage in a relationship where they are talking about this to someone. It could be a counselor, it could be a friend, it could be a mentor. But someone, and people, why? I don't want to talk about this. Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Think about, a time in your life when something happened that was so bad that you couldn't talk about it. Those are usually pretty traumatic moments. And then at some point, you bring it up. At some point through time, something that was so bad you couldn't talk about it became something that was really bad, but you could talk about it. All right? And so there is this process in just being able to bring it up that decreases the severity of what you've been exposed to. And when you open up that opportunity to be vulnerable and get feedback, I think that's where we grow. We grow through our relationships. When you're talking about teaching, and you're thinking about, you and your students, and who your favorite teachers were. And I ask my students, think about who your favorite teacher, was, and then they do, and I say, okay, what made that person your favorite teacher? They say things like, I felt this person was passionate. I felt this person cared. This person took an interest in me. This person had a sense of humor. I don't hear, well, pedagogically, the multiple choice exams were, on point and aligned with the curriculum, and they would write their objectives on the board. All things that we tell teachers to do, right, but have nothing to do with who our favorite teachers were. Mm-hmm. And so, it's the same idea about, so what do we find out about effective teachers? It's about the relationship.
Yes.
And it's the same thing that as we're processing difficult issues, one way that we grow is through the relationship. And so collaborative exploration is the first part. And then through, you then begin to think, okay, what is the role of reconciliation? Is it beneficial to try and reconcile this relationship? Or is it more beneficial for me or healthier for me to not reconcile this relationship? All right. And so if you choose not to reconcile this relationship, you're basically saying, I need to forego my feelings of ill will, and I'm going to, learn to go it alone. But I'm going to begin to release this idea that I'm not going to be angry anymore. And I do that by coming to grips with the fact that what I wanted from this person, I'm never going to get. Mm-hmm. In the case of Sheila, what did she want? She wanted a supportive mom. She wanted a healthy family. She wanted a loving father. She's not going to get any of those things.
Right.
Right. But 10 years from the time I see her, do we want Sheila to be going, I didn't get any of those things, you know,
Right.
and still be angry? No, we want her to be able to go, you know what, I survived through this.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't wake up with feelings of hostility or anger anymore. Or we decide that we are going to, that reconciliation would be beneficial. And one of two things happen, you know, when we decide that reconciliation is beneficial, we do have to confront the offender. You know, I call it confronting Vader.
Yeah.
All right. Vader has a choice,
Mm-hmm.
you know, he can throw the emperor down the hole and, you know, and reconcile with his son. And thereby he's showing remorse and change. And Luke and Vader can reconcile the relationship, you know, because he's going to die in the next scene, you know, or in that scene, you know, they don't get to renegotiate their relationship.
Yeah.
But, you know,
yeah,
yeah, that's, you know, but that, you know, the idea that you can renegotiate the relationship, confront the offender. And if you're seeing remorse and change, you can go even further. Or the offender doesn't have any remorse and change. So it puts you back down to what you want from this relationship you're not going to get. And so your final phase is this decision phase of interpersonal versus intrapersonal forgiveness. And first you have to figure out, in collaborative exploration and role of reconciliation, what do you want? But then there's this external factor that you don't have control over that's going to determine what's healthy for you.
Well, and that's where that collaborative exploration is probably going to help too, is like offer like different things where, you know, like in your initial case, Sheila, if without you there, maybe she gets told that yet you do need to forgive him and walks down this path and like, hey, well, and like, you're not there to say, wait, this is not beneficial for you. This actually could put you in danger if you know, re-enter this relationship here. And so offering that sort of perspective, right? And like, I think, and that was what I think what's cool about how you talk about that in the book is it's who's it focused on? Because if Sheila's mom had the choice, she would have said something, or versus it's no, it's focused on Sheila. If it's beneficial to her, not beneficial to mom, about whether or not Sheila forgives.
Yeah. So yeah, and you know, so many times in cases of abuse, the victim will rescind the allegation. And, you know, go back to the same abusive dynamic. You know, so we certainly don't want that to happen.
No. So then the two different types, the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, you talk through that.
So, you know, interpersonal forgiveness is, it's about renegotiating the relationship. And, you know, and the way I look at it is, you know, and I, you know, I know couples that have been together and they're solid couples. You know, they have their gripes and their arguments, and you know, but they're strong couples. I know couples that have struggled. You know, infidelity, you know, whatever, and they figure it out. You know what? Those are strong couples too. You know, and so, you know, the ability for a couple to experience problems and overcome them, to me, is just as virtuous as the couple who never experienced problems. You know, or whatever. You know, it doesn't have to be a couple. You know, it can be a friendship, a relationship, whatever that is. You know, that ability to renegotiate and figure things out. You know, that's powerful. But it's also powerful to know when that's not good for you, or just, you know, where your limits are. You know, you know, there are times where someone might truly be sorry and remorseful and change, but you're just not there anymore.
Mm.
You know, and and so sometimes recognizing that what you want you're never going to get, and that happens for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it happens because it's forced upon you, like through a death, trying to reconcile with someone who's no longer around.
Mm-hmm.
That can be difficult. You just have to accept the fact that I'm never going to be able to renegotiate this relationship. I'm forced into this process, and I talk about this process of intrapersonal forgiveness as a grieving period. I compare it to the stages of grief, where you have depression and anger and denial, because we go through these phases, and of trying to let go of and come to grips with what I want, I'm never going to get. And we have, sometimes what we're angry at or what we want forgiveness from isn't a person, it's a thing. A dear friend of mine just got married. She envisioned this elaborate wedding,
Mm-hmm.
And her friends and family are there and we're all celebrating. She didn't get that.
Right.
She can't be mad at anybody. It's just, what I wanted from this event, I'm not going to get, but I want to be married and I don't want to wake up angry that I'm not married, but I also don't want to wake up and be angry that I didn't get the wedding that I wanted,
Mm-hmm.
And so, she became very much at peace with this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good example of that. Yeah, I was just saying, I mean, like there's similar sorts of examples in the book where I think it's Jesse maybe who didn't, ever get to hear his mom connecting with him. I think about my own story. There's some, my dad, I lost him early and alcoholic ending to his life, but good guy otherwise. Good dad up until that point. But like, I was mad that he wasn't around. Like, hey, I'm a teacher. I got summers off. Let's go to a ball game, and he's not there to do that. And there was some like anger having to deal with, and like the process that you describe in your book about like this, releasing. I can't do anything about that relationship now, and so it's like the path I was walked through, not specifically the one that you're laying out, but it basically led me to that point where there is this releasing of debt, and I'm not going to wake up every morning like mad at dad. But this allows, it took a while to get through that. It took about 10 years to get through that. And so, but got through it. And so, I don't know, it makes me think like there's power in this idea of this releasing of the debt or just in the forgiveness, reconciliation model. And I'm just curious about what advice or what perspective would you offer to, teachers, parents who might be thinking about this model in their own interactions with their students. Because there's one thing, as you're saying these things, is I know that when I've had an issue with a student, like, they cheated on something, or I've had or there's a behavior thing, and I handled it in the class. I was a big, I didn't like to send them to the principal. I'd like to deal with it in the unit, as they say in A Few Good Men, deal with it in the unit. And so like able to have a conversation and walk them through, and then there's a renegotiation of, I believe there's a renegotiation of the relationship. And actually we probably exited that thing stronger because we had a stronger relationship because we had a better understanding of each other. Maybe I understood their needs better. He understood my expectations, and maybe we even exited stronger after that incident. So I don't know, what suggestions or what advice or what perspective do you offer to teachers or parents who are thinking about this model?
We've talked about some really severe stuff.
Yeah.
Abuse and infidelity. But our everyday life is filled with examples of conflict and forgiveness that don't extend to those situations.
Right.
Like a misbehavior in a classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I give an example of two friends who go out to lunch together, and they each take turns, taking each other out to lunch. And one friend always chooses a high-end restaurant, and the other friend chooses like Chili's or Applebee's or something. Something not so high-end.
I love the chips and salsa, Rick. Come on now.
Oh yeah. This is the skillet and the queso.
Got it. Yeah, okay.
That's awesome. So, she's finally like, you know what? I'm tired of getting taken advantage of in this situation, and I'm not going to have lunch with this person anymore. And I'm not, and at first that decision may be made out of anger, but then it might be, I'm at peace with it. I'm good, and so, we have circumstances like that, and yet we also know, that decision of no longer doing lunch is probably going to impact the friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, the person making that decision has to be okay with that. And so these, relationships and what gets us angry, and when we fail to, not necessarily fail, but when we decide that we're not going to renegotiate a relationship, that can, there's such a wide spectrum of events and things that impact that. And sometimes we make the decision to never let go,
Mm-hmm.
to always be angry about it. And, I talk about that. I talk about, anger kind of gets a bad rap. We approach anger as if anger is a bad thing, but what if anger is sometimes a good thing? My anger can protect me.
Mm.
My anger can help me get things done. Sometimes I enjoy being angry. So
some would say when the Packers drafted a quarterback in the first round, that made Aaron Rodgers have the outstanding start to the season he's having. So yeah, anger could be helpful. Yeah.
yeah. And so, I tell a story about my bar mitzvah. I have my bar mitzvah, and we have a reception in the synagogue in the social hall, and my mom made this beautiful smoked turkey, and it's sliced, and one of the congregants walks up to her and says, "Susie, this is really good ham." And my mom is like, "Ham in the synagogue? Are you crazy?" And, kind of a funny story. 30 years later, my daughter has her bat mitzvah. And my mother says, and that Arnold Meichenbaum, he came up to me and he said, "Susie, this is really good ham." And I had to tell him, "Ham in the synagogue? Are you crazy?" And I'm like, wow, some things are never forgiven. 30 years later, and she's still, upset about this. You don't even live in Little Rock, Arkansas anymore. You retired in Florida. You're still talking about my bar mitzvah and this guy who accused you of having ham in the synagogue. It was cute. It was funny. But that was my mom. If she were to see this guy, she would never cut this guy slack on that, ever.
That's funny. So basically, are you saying with like these smaller incident, like how would you, like, what advice are you giving? Sorry, Rick, I'm going to point you right back.
I you know what? it doesn't have to be this major incident in our life that impacts our relationships. Our relationships are affected by so many elements that occur day to day.
Yeah.
And, our thoughts about forgiveness and how we renegotiate relationships versus when we decide that it's healthy for me to go it alone and to move away and to just wipe away debt and to say, what I want from this relationship, I'm not going to get. It doesn't have to be a major event. We don't have to beat ourselves up when we go, you know what, this person just annoys me.
Yeah.
Well, it's not like, they're abusing you. No, I don't feel comfortable in the relationship. I don't feel respected. And it's nothing major. It's just all these small, minor things that bother me. Working through conflict and forgiveness doesn't have to be exclusive to these major episodes. They can include all the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. When you're cut off on the interstate, and you have to slam on the brakes and you're angry, and what do you want to do? I want to drive by this person and flip them off, and people do that, versus, what did I want? What I wanted was to be able to drive relaxed and safe. And this person is not letting me do that. All right. And nothing I do, not speeding, not giving this person a dirty look, is going to change that. As a matter of fact, it might make it worse.
Right.
And so, we often don't look at being cut off on the interstate by a stranger as a relational exercise, but it kind of is.
Yeah, I could see, like the diagram you put, that puts me right at the point of like, is it going to be beneficial to reconcile? Like, probably not, like, I don't know what that looks like. So I'm going to have to let this one go.
Yeah.
That's good. And again, I like the visuals in the book. I like I used to do a little bit of coding. And so it reminded me of some of my decision point, diagrams and things like that I had to make. And that's helpful. Like I'm thinking about that now in some of my interactions with kids and like, what am I doing here? Is this something that we do here? Or is this maybe something we need to talk further with my wife about to decompress? How do we handle this situation versus, is this something I can handle in the moment? Right. And so I don't know, you've opened up a lot of ideas to me and ways to handle situations that I had not considered before. And again, all the perspective, all the stories and things, I think bring life to the model. And also knowing that you've got the inventory, some validation too, right? So that's been excellent.
Yeah, and it was fun to include that in the book and go through like the different profiles that people can get, from it. I had a former doctoral student that did her dissertation using this, Dr. Nefertari Harris.
Nice.
And it's a qualitative dissertation. And she's interviewing clinicians and clients on their experience with the inventory and seeing a visual of their results and how they process this. And so, there's a nice narrative that goes with this structured quantitative analysis. There's a nice bit of narrative data that also further validate, what it is that this measure does, and how it can be used.
So would you like to take this platform to express your love for qualitative research right now, Dr. Balkin?
Some research questions are best answered quantitatively, and some are best answered qualitatively.
That's right.
Yeah.
There you go. They just always negotiating their relationship. That's right.
That's right.
All right. Final question I got for you. I know you're an experienced teacher.
Yeah.
And you are deal with a lot of different people in the School of Ed who are coming to your classes to learn about quantitative methods. I know you guide many people through their dissertation process. I know you've worked with many folks in other environments, and you're even trained up to be an English teacher. So this is a podcast is thinking about how do we get better at teaching. What's one thing that you do that you've learned in your teaching that you're like, hey, this is something that I don't think maybe many people know about, or maybe a lot of people know, but I just want to reinforce it. Here's my number one insight on teaching.
Yeah. We don't learn through the delivery of information. We learn through the internalization of information. And what I tell my students is this. And keep in mind, I teach master's and doctoral students, mostly doctoral students.
Mm-hmm.
You know, top 2% most educated people in the country. All right. And I asked them, how many of y'all have a bad habit? And I usually have to say, come on, how many of y'all have a bad habit? And I get everybody to raise their hand. And all right, maybe your bad habit is that you eat too much fast food, or maybe you drink too much soda, or maybe your bad habit is that you bite your fingernails, or maybe your bad habit is that you don't get enough exercise during the week. You know, we all have bad habits. And here you are as doctoral students going to become the most educated people in the country. And you're aware of your bad habits. You know you have bad habits and you haven't changed them. Mm. So awareness and knowledge does not create change. All right? When do you change? You change when you've internalized it. You know, when you've internalized it and you're like, that internalization drives you to action. Nobody starts smoking cigarettes thinking that it's okay for them. Everybody today, you start smoking, you know it's bad for you. We all know this, all right? But you're gonna smoke anyway. Why? Because you haven't internalized the consequences. And you might not internalize the consequences for 30 years until you get a bad diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And so I always tell teachers and educational leaders, think beyond the dissemination of knowledge and consider how you can internalize that knowledge into experience.
Great. Yeah, I always thought, that's a great one. Cause like, I think about, you know, if I could just come up with the best explanation for this is going to hit home. Cause that's, you know, a lot of times that's how I learn. I just memorized procedures and stuff. That was what we got. But like when I became a teacher, that wasn't what was effective. Like that was like just sharing information was the telling isn't teaching. And that's my first lesson.
So 7 words, I got you.
Oh yeah. What you got?
Choose to let go rather than stay.
Ooh.
So I have a longer quote, and it's on page 32 of the book. And when I was reading the book, I came across this passage, and I was like, oh my God, I wrote that.
That's fun.
I wrote, maybe a reason you choose not to let things go is that you might prefer to let them stay.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, it comes into this idea that, you know, why don't we change? And it's because change is uncomfortable. And so, you know, when you choose to let go rather than stay, you know, we're choosing to get out of our comfort zone. And, you know, that's where our growth is going to occur.
Yeah. It's like our local district is making changes to standards-based grading, and it's causing a lot of problems. It's just, I think it's great. I think like you're able to point at exactly what kids are mastering. You can do a lot, like you can do some extensions based off of what kids are knowing now, rather than some, you know, abstract prediction of who is, you know, gifted and who is not. Like it's like you can actually look at evidence and see like what things are happening. It's like, but parents struggle, and like, you know, and I admit I probably struggled initially. Like, what does this mean for this system that I know pretty well because I'm a part of it? But like, no, it's like I need to let go. This is better. And so, you know, those sorts of, you know, maybe small examples of of that. And that's a good one. I like it.
All right.
All right, Rick. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your book. We can pre-order it at Square Books. You can do that. I think you can do that online too, right?
Yeah. You can pre-order it through Square. If support your local bookstore.
Support your local bookstore. I will put the link in there. That's a big push that we do here on the podcast. So we're going to support the local bookstore. I'll put a link in the show notes for this episode, and we'll put it out. And it'll be about a month before you get it. I did my pre-order. I asked for a personalized autograph, so
cool.
As well. So you can get that edition as well. So anyway, thank you, Rick. Thank you for your time, and thank you for bringing this book into the world.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast. Appreciate it.
All right, there we go. That's about all I have for this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Show notes for this episode can be found at amazonplanet.com/episode 36. And if you're looking for ways to support the podcast, go pre-order Rick's book, or go buy Rick's book if it's after December 1st. You can get that at Square Books. I'm guessing you can also get it on Amazon and other places. We will update the show notes as more places become available, but right now you can get it at Square Books, and you can order that online. So we'll put a link in the show notes. It's there. But if you're looking for other ways to support this podcast, you can subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can subscribe to the Amazon Planet download, which is a periodic email that contains teaching resources and updates from Amazon Planet. We had a giveaway in the latest Amazon Planet download, and maybe we'll try and keep giving stuff away in the next one. So go ahead and sign up for the Amazon Planet download. The way you can do that is go to amazonplanet.com. There's many buttons for you to sign up for the email list, and you can go ahead and just click that button and sign up, and you might be able to get access to some swag or some of these books we've featured, maybe even Mr. Rick's book. So you can also follow at Amazon Planet on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, or like the Amazon Planet Facebook page. You can check out the Amazon Planet store or Amazon Planet bookshop. Links in the footer at amazonplanet.com, where your purchases support the production costs of the podcast. We're very appreciative of that. All right, so thank you for listening to this episode of the Amazon Planet podcast. Thanks to Rick Balkin for coming on and sharing his expertise and sharing this book and all the stuff that went into that. It was a great conversation. Thanks to Matt Mifflin for the music in this episode. And finally, thank you to all of you out there who are seeking to teach better and be the good in the world by investing in the lives of others. This world is a better place because you have decided to use the gifts you've been given to serve others. Thank you for all that you do. Peace.